transportation progress really come into their own hour, whereas before it all took place only by decades or eras or generations or epochs or epochs, whatever it is, centuries and periods of influence to study art. Now it happens every 4 years. So if you were mesmerized by the contributions of Millard Fillmore, overwhelmed by the eloquence of President Pierce, transported by the ethical vision of Andrew Johnson, just wait until you get to Calvin Coolidge, or to the moral passion of President Harding and President Hoover and President Ford. Well, what's the point? The evil in this lie of progress, this myth, this fraud, evil isn't that it allows us simply an optimism of an idiot, which it does. The evil is that we're given ethical exemption by the myth. If everything good is going to happen anyway without us, then there isn't any need for you and me to put our bodies or our lives or our careers out on the line to fight for something we believe. If progress is inevitable, why pay the price of struggle, risk, and confrontation? Why pay the price of loss of friends, loss of allies, loss of benefactors, loss, God help us, of promotion, loss of tenure, if everything good is going to happen anyway without us? Just like the use of the subjunctive, the use of the third person, the use of the conditional, the myth of progress lifts us up and sets us down outside of history. From this point on, we do not rise, we do not struggle, we do not dare to aspire to transform. Instead, we sit and watch it on TV, or else observe those who have the will to advocate change, present their views upon a stage, and then go home to comment on how poorly it was done, how much that arrogant fellow managed to leave out. In other words, we pick at the presentation and we do not dare to face the painful fact. But what about that painful fact, that myth of progress? What does it amount to when you're dealing with a real situation that you have to live with in your life? Let me give you one example in my own. So I believe this and lived with this for a long time myself. I've discussed this in my book, In the Night is Dark, but artists, liberals, white folk, just like me, cadging his meals and shirts and shoes and short-term love. Now most of them have gone up to the communes in Vermont to weave baskets or to join in transcendental meditation. Peter's friends are gone, but Peter is still here, and Peter makes the rounds each evening as he did before. I find myself afraid to go out nights, even to the movies, for fear that he'll be sitting on the stoop in front when I get home, his small black dog half frozen by his side. So I do good, as I believe good liberals ought to do. for a year or more, I say, well, he needs fattening. He has trouble learning in the school, but I say, well, he's just hungry in the morning. Year has come. Year has gone. One day, I know somehow that Peter is no longer growing. I go into a panic. World falls into pieces. I have some tests made, a psychological exam. Peter is examined by a specialist on growth, on the nervous system. The word he brings into my life is something new, microcephalic. Brain growth was impeded prior to birth or else in infancy. He will not ever grow up to a normal size. I shake my head, say to the doctor, but he is only the size of a small child. Doctor is firm in his professional decision. Nonetheless, this young man will not grow up to normal size. I ask the doctor what causes something of this sort. He gives his head a curious shrug, like that. Prenatal care. Mother must have been ill, poor, underfed, deprived. Often there's no obstetric care. Doctor talking still. Sometimes, too, he says, it's a case of near starvation in the early months of life. I listen to this doctor and I hear, I comprehend. It all makes sense. It fits in very well with what I know. And the doctor goes on with this insane, relaxed, comfortable tone. Proper facilities someday, with the right health care and with proper programs. We'll deal with this when the mother first comes in. It almost never happens in rich neighborhoods anymore. It's a problem of the ghetto slum, poor white neighborhoods, impacted sections of the cities. Someday, of course, we ought to have facilities to deal with this. Someday, this doctor says. But we're alive on this day. And Peter will not be born someday, will not be crippled one day. He is sitting here right outside the office this day. Peter is not a child who might perhaps come in for an examination one day, whom we might meet or think of, deal with someday, a statistician's future. He's a real boy in a real world with a real curse. There is a moment when I want to tell myself that this curse ought to doom the city that I live in. Then that rewarding instinct for the apocalypse subsides. I've been given a promise, after all. Medical services will one day be provided for poor people such as Peter, and someday there will be prenatal clinics for expectant mothers, treatment center for the child who is not born with entirely proper brain development. Someday. Someday, but not this day. Someplace, but not in this place. For some child, but not for this child. This child, this one real child, this one thin kid right here, age 14, by the name of Peter, is alive today. He isn't going to profit from the research and evaluation of the next 10 decades. He will not be born again in 1980 or 1985. He will not get a second run through on the hour of his imperfect birth by the goodness of the U.S. Congress or the assembled benefactors of the American Medical Association. He is alive right now. It will be too late for him the next time. But the myth is loud and potent, and the optimistic lie that it purveys is hard to puncture. The trials of the poor will inevitably dissolve. Things will get better. The lame will walk. The sick will soon be healed. Those all-day lines of pain and waiting in poor people's hospitals around the land will soon be gone. In their place will be a new regime of swift, efficient service. Meanwhile, the powerful and important man can check into a private room within a high-class hospital. The rich can check into the Mayo Clinic. Poor can sweat it out in crowded corridors of backstreet clinics in the ghettos of Los Angeles, Chicago, New York. Pain goes away without us. Inevitable progress. Why should we interrupt our own convenient, comfortable, and inevitable careers in order to deal with matters of this kind? So I repeat, as far as I'm concerned, public schools are not a great mistake. They sell us lies, but the lies they sell are lies which serve the interests of the people who control the school boards and the government of our nation. To quote Helen Keller, our elections, our democracy is but a name. We vote. What does that mean? We choose between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. This year, Tweedledum was a little bit more charming than Tweedledee, but they're still supported by the same rich people, and they still will defend the same rich interests. I wish there was time to talk about the contrast that I saw in Cuba recently, but there are two reasons why I'm not going to do so. One is that I've talked for almost an hour, a little more in fact, and the other is that if I do, you might think that I'm some kind of a agitator or radical, communistic or something like that. And I don't want to give anyone that impression. So if you'd like to talk about Cuba, we'll be talking about that later in a workshop. I think it's more important to talk to the rank and file teachers who are here tonight before I stop, because I don't like to antagonize needlessly an audience of earnest men and women, whether you agree with me or not. Seems to me the essence of this country is to allow us honest dissent. And those who feel that because of the right of honest dissent, therefore they should not dissent in strident terms, seem to me to invalidate the right to start with. If you're going to dissent, I think you ought to do it in a way which has the passion to make the people in your audience know exactly how you feel. But I don't want to make people feel defensive. Anything I said that's harsh about teachers, I could have said about myself, the years in which I taught. And I don't want to seem to claim insight for myself, which others do not share, because I don't have any more experience than many people here tonight. It's interesting, though, to me how many thousands of teachers across the country who privately confess to me late at night, usually after the 5th beer, that they share my views and fight for them already without my knowledge, often by searching after fellow-minded teachers and reflective parents and sometimes sympathetic principals and supervisors and the like, in order to form alliances in face of punitive action or retaliation by their local school boards. Many of the teachers that I know work hard with their allies through the unions. Others, when they give up on the unions, work through the new phenomenon of teacher centers. These are small groups, mini centers in a sense, where teachers meet outside of public school to give each other strength and courage to keep on. There must be over 100 teacher centers coast to coast. It takes real guts for teachers to fight back against the 150-year-old function which has been assigned to public schools in the United States: class stratification, indoctrination. In order to strive not for domestication, but for liberation, not for William Calley, Richard Nixon, but Thoreau. But there are tens of thousands of such teachers, as I've found, with all the guts it takes, and whether they're young or old, or east or west, suburban or urban, isolated in small cities, or working together in strong coalitions in such major areas as New York and Chicago and St. Paul. These are teachers who are carrying out a bold, courageous, and heroic struggle almost like guerrilla warfare from within the institution of the public school itself. They do not do so without grave risk and danger, nor at times without the payment of a very large and precious price. It seems to me that they deserve all of the allegiance and all of the comradeship that we can afford to give them. There are some patriots super patriots who feel that we shouldn't speak of things like this at all during this period of the bicentennial. To me, it seems it's absolutely the right time. What better time than the deep moral celebration of the liberation of our nation from imperialist power, and to look hard at the 150-year-old function of the public school and feel the courage to turn it inside out and upside down. No longer to accept the primary goal to make our nation strong. We're strong enough. We can only destroy the rest of the world once. Rather, to make our people ethical and judicious in the use of strength. To honor not the tradition of Nixon, Eisenhower, Mitchell, and John Dean, but that of Samuel Adams, Cesar Chavez, Dr. Spock, Dr. Martin Luther King. Basic point for so many of us is frequently so quickly and so easily forgotten. Schools were not produced out of the forehead of a god. They weren't invented by magic or by myth. Schools were created just over a century ago by ordinary men and women just like you and me. They can be changed by you and me as well. And if they aren't, they won't be changed by anybody else. Many people fear that if we grant our kids the power to say no, to think hard, to fight back, debate, refuse, we will lose all decent patriots in our nation. The heritage of our founding fathers will go down the drain. I hear this frequently. This is the sort of thing Bill Buckley says. Well, to this I have two answers. First of all, the super patriots who voice this kind of fear, this fear of contestation, honesty, and truth in the classroom. These, I find, are the first to cry when anyone tries to interrupt their right to free and open competition in the business world. Indeed, their battle cry for decades now has been the sacred character of free and open competition within a free, competitive arena. It is notable, in my own belief, that almost all of those who hold this view reverse themselves right at the classroom door. The free market survives, in their belief, everywhere within the USA. But God forbid there should be a free market of ideas within the public school. It might enable their children to think hard about the things they do, the way they earn their money, the way they lead their lives. There is no free market within the public schools today. It is a monopoly. Nor, if right-wing school boards have their way, will there ever be anything resembling a free market. Only by the risk-taking intervention of the teacher will anything like a free and open market of ideas ever exist within the U.S. public schools. And the other thought that occurs to me in this regard, whenever I hear these super patriots cry out that the nation can't survive the introduction of a lot of radical ideas and piercing criticisms, especially those which now and then say something good about the socialist world. Whenever I hear these patriots talk, I wonder just how patriotic they could really be. If they believe that all of our old American ideals, all that is precious, all that is unique is going to go down the drain and fall to pieces at the first prick of the pin, first moment of combat and debate, I wonder how fragile and how weak these people judge our age-old principles to be. If there's anything decent in the United States, if there's anything worth our love and our respect, and surely it ought to stand up before the test of criticism and of contestation from the socialist world, and from our own internal critics too. And if it can't, then, we've got a hard problem to resolve. If the whole thing is too weak to stand up under the scrutiny and contestation of this kind, how worthwhile could it be? If it won't survive the honest contest of ideas, then perhaps it does not deserve to. I believe it can and will survive the contest of ideas from other nations, other ways of life, with adequate adaptation. But if it can't, I'm speaking now the way we live here in the USA. If it can't, then, in my belief, it is not worthwhile fighting to preserve. It is not worthwhile dying to uphold. Confident patriots are not scared of strong competitive ideas. School boards are, because they are not confident patriots. False patriots are. The patriots with blinders. They want to educate another generation like themselves. These are not the rebels, not the radicals. These are the real subversives. Subversive of the best things that this nation represents. And these are the ones that we must fight and struggle to defeat and stop. Well, finally, there are a few who will resort to the ultimate argument, and they'll say, if we don't have political indoctrination in the schools, how can we ever win the battle with the Soviet Union, the Soviet bloc? I always find myself in strongest disagreement from the start with this idea. There is not going to be any victory over the Soviet Union. If it is a victory, it is a victory which will enable the victor to inherit a desert of dead souls. The only victory is the victory, which has been phrased quite well, as the victory to win the hearts and minds of people who live in the third world. And I think the point ought to be obvious by now, that we're never going to win the hearts and minds of people in the third world, nor even that of poor people here in our own, with bigger bombs, slicker Kissingers. We just might do it by the education of a generation of young kids, with the courage of St. Francis, the ethics of Gandhi, the passion of Thoreau, and with the unabated courage in the face of unjust orders to say no. Well, it'll be thrown at me, I'm sure, if not in my presence, then tomorrow in your classrooms, that I did not offer positive suggestions here tonight. Unconstructive criticism. Why didn't he tell us what to do? It's like, the people who went to Vietnam and said that we should stop the war. As if General Westmoreland were to say, well, if you don't like this one, please show us a better one. It's no fair to offer credit. They always say that to third grade kids who don't like the Scott Forsman Reader. The child says, God, I can't stand this, it stinks. And the teacher says, it's all very well and good for you to criticize this book, Olivia, but a lot of people worked a long, long time to write this book, and draw these illustrations, and buy this book, and bribe our school board into buying it, and write the teacher's guide to show us how to sell it to the class, and it's very easy for you to criticize what all those people did. Can you write a better book yourself? And obviously, how many third grade children are prepared to write a better version of the Basil Reader? And even more important, how many in their right mind ever would want to? It seems to me there's a time for saying no. Time for saying no with the full luxury of saying no and not presenting an instantaneous alternative. That time is now. Once we define our enemy and understand it, then it is time to find the tactics and the strategies with which to break him down. Next year, I will publish a small handbook of my own, which is finished now, on a set of ideas for practical changes in our schools, but not today. In the meantime, it seems to me that intelligent teachers all around this country have it in their power to analyze the ways that school indoctrinate their kids and figure out some sophisticated and effective means by which to struggle back. If they have to take the lead from an itinerant agitator on his way from Boston, and I really wonder whether they're ever going to be good at it at all. Real thing is to start it on their own and do it on their own. And later perhaps we can coalesce some of our ideas and put it all together into a larger book, Strategies for Nonviolent, Militant, Effective, Skillful, Honest, Revolutionary guile within the system. I'd like to apologize for swearing. I hate to do that when I'm in places that are reverential, either churches or universities, and I always feel guilty. I did it this morning at a Unitarian church in Chicago, and I've done it many times recently, and I try hard not to. I made a note on the first page and the back page of the notes that I have. It said, "Don't swear, don't curse," but I did it. Maybe you didn't notice 3 times. I try hard, but I forget because I get mad. I was working with United Farm Workers a couple of years ago in Ohio. I lost my cool completely after 6 days in which we did 6 speeches every day, traveling with Cesar Chavez and sleeping 4 hours every night. And somewhere around speech number 36, I forgot myself completely, and I lost all control. And I was speaking about the boycott on that wine that makes you sick, and I lost all control. I just blasted out with all the dirty words I knew, and suddenly, it was very easy because in this, as so many Catholic churches, modern churches now, are just clean A-frames, and you don't see any religious symbolism along the walls, so you have no idea really where you are. It could be a McDonald's stand, and looking straight ahead, there was no way to tell. And then I suddenly realized that I was in a church, and there was Cesar Chavez sitting in front of me, and there next to me was the priest, and behind me was way higher than this wall, 5 times as high, was the biggest crucifix I ever saw in my whole life, and I felt terrible and panicked completely and stepped back and couldn't finish and didn't know what to say. The priest was a very nice man. He came rushing over to the mic and he took it away from me. He said to me, "Don't worry, it's all right." I thought he was Jewish. He said, "Jonathan, you're Jewish, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, you can't go to heaven anyway. And you won't go to hell because you never knew the truth. So I think you're going to go to purgatory." And I always figured that purgatory was someplace like Des Moines. So I just didn't think I had a lot to lose. But I guess the lesson from all of that is, don't swear, don't curse, don't cry, don't despair, don't give up, but take a stand, be willing to fight, make a choice, fight like hell, stick together. Someday, we're going to see this nation become the just and decent land that it was meant to be at the beginning. Thank you.